for our purposes, specifically what today we're going to talk about is grades, Lamakū grades. And it's not so much a workshop as it is a brief overview to the grades features in Lamakū. But let me allow Kalea in. Hi Kalea, welcome. But specifically to the grades feature, it's one of those features that is heavily involved for the instructor, and the student, they're more viewing their grades in grades. So because it's kind of a tool for instructors, many of the questions and challenges that you might be facing would require sort of a one-to-one conversation to help you with. So for today's co-working, as we thought about what we were going to do today, we thought it's going to be really light, really quick, giving an overview of grades, and heavy on the conversations to help with questions that you might have, particularly at this point of the semester when grades are coming into focus for students and instructors who want to communicate that to their students. So that's how we're going to go. A real short overview of grades, but then perhaps we can stop the recording and then we can even go into breakout rooms. Lauren's here, Shelby's here, I'm here, and we could meet with you individually in a breakout room so that we can discuss your actual course grades and what's going on in your courses. So thank you for joining us today for co-working, and it is an open period for the next 2 hours. Don't feel like you have to stay for the whole 2 hours. You ask your question, and then if you want to work, you're welcome to work on it. If you want to leave, we understand too. So let me just begin by just sharing my screen. And I guess I could ask for a show of hands. How many of you have explored the grades feature? Okay, so 2 of you. And would you say that you're medium or advanced, or just still at the exploring level? So medium. Oh, medium.
Yeah, sort of. But what it is, just I assume that it would work on its own.
Oh. Well, okay. For the most part, it does work on its own, but it does need a little bit of attention to get it,
right,
smoothly working. So let me go ahead and let me share my screen so I can give a brief tour of grades. So first of all, Lamakū Grades is the grade book. It's not called Lamakū Gradebook, it's called Lamakū Grades. And you would find it up in the upper bar up here under grades. Obviously, it's unique to each course. A companion to grades, this is my sandbox. So just to let you know, but yours would be similar. Your actual live course would be similar. A companion to the grades tool is the quick eval tool. And particularly when it comes to grading work, those two work really well together. And the concept of the quick eval would be something you might want to familiarize yourself with, in my opinion, when it comes to the grades. Basically, the quick eval, just really quickly, talk about the quick eval tool, but real quickly, there are 2 categories, submission, to view it by submissions or by activities. In using it this semester, I've tended to use it under the activities view more. So when I go into quick eval, I tend to click on activities. And what the idea is here is when students turn things in, the quick eval will list them or display them here in a dashboard. So it makes it easier for you to know what you need to grade. And so, like in the activity or the course that I'm doing this semester, I might have in a given week 1 or 2 things students are going to be turning in for a grade. And so over the course of the week, if I'm wanting to just grade them as they come in, I would come to the quick eval, and this dashboard would show me anything new that needs my attention for us for assignments and graded discussions. And so I found you can either view them by submission here or by activity. The thing I like about the activities is when I click to grade a student, when I'm in the actual student submission, then if I'm viewing it under activities, there's a tab in the upper right corner, and I can just click on the tab to advance to the next student's submission to score. So for example, I'm looking at assignment number 2. If I had 2 students submit work for assignment 2, I would come in here under assignments, I would grade the first student's work here, and then when I'm done grading, I publish it. Up in the upper right corner, user 1 of 2, it would say user 1 of 2, and then I would just simply click on the right arrow to jump to the next student's submission for that assignment. And I find that's helpful and efficient, these grading students' work, because number 1, you just have to click to advance it, and number 2, it's in this example, it's all under the same assignment. So once I'm in the mindset of what the assignment's asking the students to do, it's easier to just flip through them and grade the submissions for that one assignment. So that's just a little quick tip on the quick eval tool. I tend to look at them by activities. And then if you had more than one submission or more than one assignment or discussion submitted that week, on this dashboard page, you would just go down to the next one, and it would update these numbers if anything new came in. So that's an easy, efficient way to grade the new work that comes in. And why I just briefly touched on quick eval was because it's sort of tied to grades. So when you update or evaluate program or assignments or discussions here, they will then populate into grades, which is our topic for today. Has anyone been using quick eval? No? You might consider looking at it. I mean, a lot of it depends on how your course is organized and how assignments are scheduled. But yeah, like in my particular case, when I have 1 or 2 assignments due in a given week, it does help me to know when students turn things in, and it is organized, helps to organize things. So it actually is interesting, quick evaluation feature. But eventually it leads to the grades, which is what we're going to talk about today. So in the Lamakū Grades or gradebook, there are 4 tabs here across the top. And there's actually a 5th thing to know about, which is over here called settings. So we'll just start here on the left with enter grades. So enter grades will provide you with a list of your students. So in this particular case, you know, I have some demo students in here, and I have another guest account in here. And again, you can view them in this format by user. If you're doing things with sections or groups, this is another place where you can view your student list by just clicking on this drop-down menu. In this case, it's defaulting to user, so I'm getting a whole list of users. Or if you wanted to, if you had groups set up, you could view them by groups, and then you would hit apply, and it would rearrange this list according to which students are in which groups. So that's a nice thing. Going down here, one of the things that I found helpful too is these little flag icons. If you had a student that you were maybe concerned about and you wanted to flag them, 1 or 2 students, you could click on these little flags, and then that's another way that you can sort your student list in your grades. So here I have 2 flags checked off, and I want to view by user, but I'm going to go for search for. So here I'm going to go into my search for show search options, and down here where it says flag, I'll enable that, and I'll make sure it's flagged, right? Then I'll come up here and I'll click on the magnifying glass. And then I'll sort. And there were just 2 students that were flagged, that I had flagged. And so now it's just showing me those students. So, think about how this can be scaled, because, as you're teaching classes, your classes, the number of students might get rather large. So that's really when these 2 things will help you a lot. When you have 20, 30 students in a section, this ability to flag, but also the ability to see by groups, that's when, these features are helpful to know about. And then if you want to, reset, you just click on clear search and it goes back to showing all of the students, right? Of course, you can do the arrow to organize things too. Yes, go ahead. Is that Karim?
But what's the use of flagging them?
So flagging them is just for yourself if for one particular reason, like let's say demo student 2 is not doing so well.
Oh, okay.
Or I've made a special effort to work with demo student 2 to improve their scores. And then, if there was any concern about demo student 2, I would flag them. And then if I wanted to keep an eye on how they were doing, when I log in, I would just search. And keep in mind, normally your class would have a lot more students than I'm showing you right now. So it's just another way of identifying specific students who might need your attention.
Okay.
Yeah. And then again, you click on clear search and it reverts back to showing everybody. And then as I was just briefly mentioning, the arrow is another way that you can sort your either A to Z or Z to A, right? So those were 2 organizational features. But then just like with Laulima, you can scroll horizontally. Final calculated grades. And then there's also final adjusted grades, which hopefully Shelby can talk a little bit more about the difference between those 2 in a little bit. But as you scroll across to the right, you'll see your typical grade items as they're organized. You can also see section, headings too, which we'll also cover in a bit. So it's kind of similar to Laulima. Obviously, when you click on the student's name, then you get a little bit individual report on that particular student, such as their final grade at the moment, and then scores for the assignments that they've turned in. So often in grades, what I do if I need to is I just go back up to grades when I need to reset. I haven't really found an easy way to get back to the main grades page. So like in this example, I guess I could do save and close, or I just click on grades and it takes me back to this page. Right? Then the next tab over is manage grades. So manage grades, this is where you set up your gradebook. Kind of also like Laulima. In the manage grades, there's a couple of important things to know about. If you can tell on your screen, there's a slight blue background color, or grayish blue. Those rows, those are actually sections, or sorry, categories, to be accurate. Categories are kind of like sections or sections of your grade book. So you can organize things under categories for both visual and actually there's some like calculations that you can do as far as adding up the items within a category first and then adding those categories together for the whole of the gradebook. So it's not just visual, but there are some strategic or quantifiable steps or reasons to have sections. Just off the top of my head, one thing you need to know about sections if you're doing bonus points is you would have to enable the section to allow for the points to exceed, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes when Shelby shares. But just for this portion of our talk, I just wanted to point out the difference between items and sections. So just like with Laulima, gradebook items would be manually things that you're wanting to score or include in a gradebook final grade calculation. Those would be items, and categories would be things like, I guess in this one I had something called the grind, but it could be like presentations or assignments or quizzes. So depending on how you have your grade book normally organized, you could create categories for them.
So, Brent, the category would be something like what I have, like reaction reports, discussion reports, and the usual, MCQs.
Right.
Would be the category. And the other one that you talked about, the item or something, so that would be the one for me to, if I can do it manually and enter the grade or the score for the student.
Right. So the grade items are the actual assignments, and the categories are like what you had described, the different, I guess, types of assignments that you teach in your class. So let me just show this one. So this is a more real world example of a managed grades section of the grades. So in this section I have categories for some of the main types of activities in a course. Like this is a good example. The categories G, learner's choice, and so learner's choice is the type of activity that the students are doing. And then learner's choice A1, A2, B1, B2, those are grade items. So these are the things the students turn in. So these are the grade items. And this light grayish blue is the section or category identifier. And then I have another category of assignment, the show and share gallery. And that one is named H, show and share. And under that, the assignments are organized under show and share by week. So it's just a way of organizing your grades, gradebook. Yeah. It makes it easier, particularly if students are missing work, to know what they're missing. So let me jump back to this course. So that was enter grades and manage grades. Schemes is something relatively new to us, but it's part of Lamakū or Brightspace. Schemes, you'll have some default schemes here. And I'm not sure if you remember in Laulima how you could have different scales for your letter grades in your Laulima gradebook. So schemes is similar in that these schemes, if you take a look at it, allow you to specify your ranges as a percentage, and then your symbol or letter grade. And then there's also color. So the color is nice because you can assign a color to students who are doing really well, like in the 90% and above, and you can assign students who might need more like attention. And you would see those colors in your list of your students, so you know who might need help. So you can customize these colors, and looks like you can add more ranges as well. But the scheme, you then, after you have it set up, you apply it, and that's what that prior screen was. You select which scheme you want to use with your grades. So for the setup wizard, it's meant to help you the first time. Oh, sorry, Kalea. Yes, I see you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Brent, do those colors automatically set up? Because I can see that right now. It's like I think it's green for my A students, I mean blue for those that are in the B range. Do they kind of auto set up the color scheme?
Yeah, I think for some of the default schemes, they do have colors already. I kind of use my own scheme, but I think some of these other schemes set by the organization do have some colors already assigned. So it's
Okay,
possible.
I thought, wow, I did something great and I didn't know.
I think it's one thing that the Brightspace is proud of. Like that is one of the things where instructors are like, oh, wow, that's helpful to have. Among other different new features, such as the intelligent agent and that type of thing, with regards to like identifying students who might need extra attention or support. So they're really proud of the schemes for the grades. Yeah. Okay, and then Setup Wizard. If you are starting out a new course, you can use the Setup Wizard. There are 7 pages to step through. So this is kind of a summary of the settings that I have for this current gradebook. But the Setup Wizard, if you scroll down to the bottom, it will walk you through some of the pages for setting up your initial gradebook. To reiterate though, you can always come back and use the Setup Wizard at any point of the semester if you need to troubleshoot things. So it's not, I mean, it's intended to be a one and done thing, but if you need to come back and walk through some of the steps in the Setup Wizard just to confirm the settings are what you want, you can always come back and do that. With the caveat of there are certain things in the grades that you don't really want to take too lightly, because any changes that you make would reflect to the grades that the students see, and which would result in you getting more questions probably, if things disappeared or if grades change drastically. So keep that in mind. You don't really want to be changing your gradebook too often, but you can come back to the Setup Wizard to go through some of the settings if you had questions about them. So on this first page, we can just look at the 3 different ways to set up the structure of your gradebook. The first one is weighted. Weighted seems to work really well for percentages and categories with percentages. So if you were going to do weighted, basically your assignments would become percentages of the category, and then the categories would become percentages of the final grade. So it's a little bit more involved in setting that up conceptually. Most of the folks tend to work with points, and even the people who are doing points who still use some percentages, they'll often just round off their points to 100 because that would represent a percentage, even though they still want to work in points. One of the benefits to working in points is that you are able to specify the exact points an assignment is, versus working in the percentages above. It's like I said, each assignment is a percentage of 100. So the percentage may change depending on how many assignments you have in a particular category. So many people do points because they can be more precise. And if they do want to do percentages with points, usually they just round them off to 100 points. So most people do points. But then there's a third one called formulas, which I personally haven't done a lot of formula setup grade books. But as I understand it, there is a protocol or a type of logic that you can write formulas for the Brightspace gradebook if you were doing advanced calculations of your grades, and then you would choose that option for a formula. So I usually do points. So that was page 1 or step 1. On the second one, there's calculated final, and then there's adjusted final, and Shelby will talk more about the differences between those two. And then there's automatically release final grade. which I normally would have that one checked off. For step 3, grade calculations, I think Shelby will also talk more about this one, but this one has to do with obviously dropping ungraded things, but also there's an option to assign the score of 0 automatically once a due date has passed. Like I said, we'll come back to this one, but this is where you could set up those options. And then 4, remember the schemes. So this is where you could specify what scheme you would like to apply to the gradebook. Keep in mind, this is the wizard, so it's basically pulling in all the different settings for grades, and it's presenting it to you in a, a user-friendly format and walking you through the different steps for setting up your gradebook. So this is where you could choose your scheme, and this is one of those where you might find out that a scheme's not working the way you want it, and you might come back later in the semester and you might change it. For example, the color thing. Like, let's say, you felt like the red was too strong of a color. You would come back. First, you would change the scheme, and then you would come back here and select a new scheme. Step 5, managing how you display, I guess, the decimal points. Some instructors might be okay with 3 decimal points, some might need 2, or some might need 1. But this is where you could come and change that if you wanted to. And then student view of display options kind of speaks for itself too. It's just how the grade is displayed to students. And then step 7 is just a summary of all the settings that you have, and then you click on finish. Now, some people never realize that up in the upper right corner, there's a thing called settings. And so settings is actually, I don't know why it's way hidden up there in the upper right corner, but it's pretty important to know about or not forget about. So within settings for the grades, there's 3 tabs. The first one, personal display options. I don't know that grade scheme color is checked off by default, so you want to make sure that that's checked off. Many of these other ones are just customizations that you can make. As you're looking at the scores in the managed grades, and it goes across horizontally. This is where you can customize some of those, the way it's displayed in that horizontal table. And particularly, this one's helpful. I find this one helpful. I check off the repeat calculated final grade at the first or at the start of the user list. So as we were looking at the students, the roster, and then to the right as we began to look at grades, the final grade was like right there. That's because I checked off this box. If this isn't checked off, then you'd have to scroll all the way to the right to see the final grade calculation. So I prefer to have that checked off so you can see it in both the left and the right. Because sometimes as you get a lot of things to grade, it's super far to scroll. And then the last important, interesting thing here is the start page. So they give you the option of when you first launch grades, where does it land on? The landing page for grades. And so if you click on this drop down, you'll see these should all look familiar, right? Enter grades will be the default landing page, and it has the students list and then the scores. But when you're setting up the gradebook prior to the semester, you're maybe not so much interested in that first page, and it'll save you some clicks if when you click on grades, you're taken straight to the manage grades tab. And so that's where you could adjust it. But for the most part, the enter grades one is fine. But it's nice that they allow you to change the landing page for grades for the instructor.
Brent, I have a question about that page. I think, what is the difference on the repeat final grades between the one that you currently have checked off and right below that?
So this one is repeat adjusted final grade. Shelby will talk more about it's mainly the difference between calculated and adjusted. So like it's a thing in Lamakū Brightspace that they have two different types of final grades, and you can choose which one you want to do. The calculated final grade or the adjusted final grade, and it has to do with how the final grade is displayed. So basically, like the calculated final grade is the one, like if you get an A and you get 90 out of 100, calculated final grade is like all of the grade items added up and, shown there. Versus adjusted final grade would be all the things in the grade book added up. But then if it was like, 89.9, you can go and you can adjust it right there. But if it was set to calculated final grade right here, to account for that 89.9, that 1.1, you can't do it right there in the letter grade. You got to go back into one of the assignments and add on a 0.1. So I believe that's accurate how I described it. But Shelby can share more in a few minutes, maybe. But that's the primary difference between the two: is one is calculated, one's adjusted. The org unit display options, a lot has to do with the decimal place and how it's displayed to students. And then the other one that I go to often is the calculated options. And again, this is where you want to choose most likely points. But, I kind of described the three a few minutes ago, so I won't go into that. But then also down here is where you could choose which one you want to display to the students, adjusted or calculated. And then, you can drop the ungraded items or do the 0 thing. And then one last thing, so that's the main areas of grades. One last thing before I throw it over to Shelby is one of the common questions that we're seeing right now for instructors is how to ensure students can see their final grade, right? And so just to touch upon that, enter grades. As you scroll down, you'll see your student's name, and then there's usually a final grades here. And if there's an eyeball, the visible icon that we all see throughout Brightspace or Lamakū, if it has a line through it, you may need to come over here to the menu, I guess, for that column and go to Edit, and then scroll down. Oops, sorry, not Edit. It's the other one. Cancel. Enter grades, and then scroll down here, and to the right, you see where it says released? You'd want to release them. You may need to release them. And I guess you can click on this to the left to select all your students, and then click on save. And that would manually kind of release the scores to the student, and then the eyeball should switch from the eyeball with the line, which means not visible, to the eyeball, meaning it is visible. So yeah, at this point, I will toss it over to Shelby. I'll stop sharing my screen, and she can share her screen, and she can touch upon a few of the grade settings that folks have been asking about.
Brent, just one question on that final calculated grade. Brent?
Yes, go ahead, Kareem.
Okay, so when I look at my final grade, it says final calculated grade, so that's already like something has happened by default. And
okay.
Yeah, and then I click on that I. When I bring the cursor, it says final grade is released. So that means student can see it.
Right. If it's the I and not the I with the slash.
Yeah, just the I. And when I bring the cursor to it, it says final grade is released.
Sure.
So that means the student can see it already.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So I will toss it to Shelby, and I'll go look in the chat. I see I've been missing a lot of chat stuff. So go ahead, Shelby.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Brent answers those questions in the chat. Good questions, by the way. Yeah, we just need to look more into it, especially with the release grade. But there is like a difference between automatically releasing the final grade versus automatically updating the final grade for the student view. So there's a small difference between those two. But yeah, I'll let Brent do that. But I'll just go over quickly final adjusted grade first, and then I'll go over bonus. So let me just share my screen. So final adjusted grade. So this is just me going grades, enter grades. Um, Times you would use a final adjusting grade is kind of maybe when like we had situations where instructors have like maybe the student's final grade so far, final calculated grade so far is maybe like 85.99. And maybe they're like, oh, I might as well like round it up. So maybe you want to just kind of put your own grade. So that's when you would do a final adjusted grade. It's just kind of like in the situation of rounding up maybe for a specific grade. Like if they're at an 89, maybe you just want to give them that A. You could change that into final adjusted grade. Or in the situations of maybe you decided later on, like some items in that grade book, you don't actually want it for grade, or you don't want it to count for the final grade. So you can also use that opportunity to kind of eliminate those. So over here, I am sharing my screen. Okay, here's my final. Hold on, I need to change my view. Okay, so final adjusted grade, this is in the enter grades view again. I would just go enter grades or edit, and then I can manually input the score. Now, if I click on this arrow, it's going to show exactly what it shows for the final calculated grade. But like I said, maybe I just want to round it up. So instead of this 114.249, maybe I want to make it 115. So I could do that and save. Oh, wait, did I not save it? Sorry. So now we have this final adjusted grade. And then, so just changed it like a little bit, but that's the point of like, it's pretty much that's the gist of the final adjusted grade. Whoops, wrong view. Sorry. Let me just go back to it to show you one more thing. So if I click this calculator icon, this is going to show me by default, like what do I want included in the final adjusted grade. So if I click this, it would show everything I did, everything that's in my grade book. But maybe we decided some of these assignments we no longer want to count towards the final grade. So we could select only those that you want included. So maybe I want all the assignments, but I'm going to eliminate the discussions. So I'm going to select all the assignments and the quizzes, not the discussions. And then maybe I want to include the extra credit. So I've selected the ones I actually want counted towards the final grade and then calculate. So you'll see it changes again. So this is a situation of when you'll use final adjusted grades. And then just like Brent kind of showed earlier, if it's towards the end and you want to release it to the student, you could just simply check it and then check release to save and close to release it to the student. And you have another option here to release it as well. Or you can just go back to the setup wizard before and then do that automatically release final grade to students. So you have three options for releasing, but that's pretty much the final adjusted grade. Okay. Any questions about the final adjusted grade? Let me look at the chat.
I have a question. I typed it in the
Yes.
chat, but
Okay.
does Lamakū have a feature like Laulima used to have where we can just publish it directly to MyUH where we enter our grades?
Oh.
Because that for me, that would be the only advantage to adjusting it in Lamakū.
No, so that was also I think Sarah's question she was getting to. It's not, as far as I know, it's not set up yet. I mean, I would imagine at some point they are going to do that, but I don't think it has been set up yet, because it's supposed to show a button, according to what Brightspace says. There's supposed to be a banner or a button in your grades that says banner update or upload. and I don't see that button yet. Lima had that feature. Eventually, they had it where you could upload automatically at the end of the semester. But I think we're still at an integration point where you have to manually put in the student's final grade into the banner system at the end of the semester. There's no automatic upload. But I would imagine they're working on it because that's pretty important to have.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check because I wanted to make sure, like, if you weren't quite done with grades, it wouldn't like accidentally, upload if you clicked something.
Yeah, I don't think as far as I know, it's not connected to the official ban or official grade submission. So don't forget to still do that. Yeah. Um, and then to answer your other question, Kalea, I think it sounds like you would want the adjusted grade. If you're going to be doing the thing where 89.5 and you might want to round it up to 90, that's an example of the adjusted final grade. If you were using calculated final grade, you would have to go into one of the assignments and give them a little bit points to bump up the final grade. You couldn't just do it at the final grade column for calculated grade.
Yeah, mahalo. This is a side note, but that's rare. But when it does happen, I just send a personal email to the student and I say, hey, look, you were at 89.5. This is why it's so important to submit your stuff on time, do the extra credit, but I'm giving you grace. So I just do it that way. But mahalo. I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, and then one final comment too is it would be good to keep both systems up to date. So like if you were gonna round it up and put that into Banner as the final grade, you probably also want to update Lamakū so that they're the same score or grade basically. Because we're still at a point where the two systems aren't synchronized. So if you do decide to be generous and give them a higher grade in Banner as a final grade, you should probably make a note or at least update your Lamakū course. So if there's any question, then you'll be reminded that that's why they have a A. It's because you're generous, and you won't be like, hey, how come in the course it says they were still at like a B? So try to keep them up to date, both of them up to date, both services. Yeah.
Thank you, Brent, for clarification. I'm going to put in the chat. So now I'm going to go over just a few like tips for bonus activities. But first, I'm going to share the doc for what is like an bonus activity versus an activity with bonus points. So I kind of went over this a couple co-working sessions before. So let me just put that in the chat real quick. So one thing I want to like correct or mention about the bonus is there is another category you're going to need to change in the gradebook. So let me go to that real quick. Okay. So in gradebook, I'm now going to grades and then manage grades. If you ever wanted to we'll just start with the basics. If you ever wanted to make an item like a bonus, like say the CES evaluation, you could just make that item, and then when you're changing the settings for the item, okay, I just click the items to edit, and then if I scroll down, I can select this check mark to make a bonus. Now, when I make it a bonus, it's going to show the star icon. So now you know that it's a bonus item. Now, to make it count towards the final calculated and final adjusted, we're also advised that once you have done the bonus part, you also need to change the settings for the final calculated or we're saying final calculated and final adjusted in case you're still unsure which one you're going to do at the end, just do it for both. So I click this final calculated grade to edit. Just make sure you check off this can exceed and then save and close. Now, if you forget to do that for the final calculated and final adjusted, just note that it might not be 100% accurate. Like say you have a student who somehow gets perfect scores in everything, plus they got perfect scores in the bonus, they would be like maybe at 105%. If you forgot to change the settings for the final calculated and final adjusted, it would just probably just show a perfect 100%, like 1,000 points out of 1,000 points. But if you did the can exceed setting for both the final calculated and final adjusted, it would show the more accurate score of being maybe like 105%, like 1,010 out of 1,000. So there is a benefit of changing that setting, but if you forget, you don't really have to worry too much because it'll still like where the person might have lacked in the assignment, it'll still input those bonus points. So it'll still show like an A. Like if they had like a 95, it'll still kind of show that it's an A. Something also to mention, if you do categories. So in my gradebook example, I have categories, but not necessarily because I have a weighted gradebook. It's just a way for me to organize on my assignments. You do also need to change those settings for the category if you wanted to have a category for extra credit to also say can exceed. And it explains more of that in that document, but I just wanted to emphasize for those who I might have already explained this bonus stuff that make sure you do change to can exceed for this final calculated and final adjusted grade. And just like a tip too, if you do feel like maybe the grade points aren't adding up, I mean, it doesn't hurt to try to like add it up yourself too, just to see if the Lamakū gradebook is accurate or not. We've already had some instructors kind of reach out to us to be like, something seems off, like help me figure out the setting. So feel free to do that too if with just one of your students' grades. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any issues. And then that doc I put in the chat earlier is just this grades doc we created. So this kind of particularly focuses more on each specific setting of the setup wizard. And then at the end, we also go over grade scheme, but it's definitely a working doc. Like what me and Brent said is not all mentioned here when he was talking about the flag icon. So we'll definitely update that probably throughout the summer, or I'll do that. But yeah, just feel free to keep this doc. It'll always be updated and it's going to be very useful if you do like still have like confusions with some of the settings. I know there's like so much grade settings, or if you kind of maybe want to like change your grade system for the following semester. So yeah, just keep that doc for safekeeping. And yeah, does anyone have any questions? Let me check the chat.
I have a question. I'm
Yes.
using percentages, so is there a way to do the extra credit with percentages? And if so, when you put it in, like, can you put it in so it adds to the overall grade, or does it go into a category, or like how's that handled?
Percentages. So you're not doing weights, right? It's just
It's weighted percentages,
oh,
so
it
I
is
have
weight.
like, one category is 30, one category is 40 or whatever.
Okay. I think I'm still this one's a little bit difficult. So that one we recommend that if you're doing a weighted grade book, you do not need to put your extra credit item into a category. We recommend you can keep it separate,
Mm-hmm.
but it is going to force you, like when you make that assignment, it is going to say you need to give a weight, a separate weight. So for some instructors, we put just 0. Like it's still going to force you to put something in that field. So you can put 0, but maybe if you do want it to count like a small percentage, you could put like I've seen instructors do like 2% or 3%. It's kind of hard for me to say because it kind of
Mm-hmm.
depends on the instructor's gradebook, but you do have that option. So we definitely recommend not putting in a category, but so you can either put the weight as 0 or you can make it like a small percentage, depending on how you feel it would equal to your gradebook. I hope that makes sense.
I'm not entirely sure it makes sense yet. Like,
Okay.
so is it like, let's say the student had a 90% in like all the categories and
Okay.
you put in the extra credit as a separate category, would it
Mhm.
like add on? So like if they had one point in there, then it would go as like 100 or like 91 percentage in there, like their overall percentage, or do you do that manually or like
Oh,
I
so
guess I'm not entirely sure how it calculates.
okay, so uh, I'm so I was trying to say like if you have one item,
Mm-hmm.
we we wouldn't recommend putting it in a
Mm-hmm.
category.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just would leave it separate, like
Mm-hmm.
on its own, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still going to require you to put a weight. So you can
Mm-hmm.
put 0, but you know how you still have to give a point value?
Mm-hmm.
It's like say 10 points. We
Mm-hmm.
could leave it at weighted 0 worth 10 points, and it would still count towards the point value.
Okay. Because
It's
I'm using percentages. Like I'm not using points.
percentages. Mm.
I don't know if you need me to talk to you at another time for that.
Okay, maybe we could meet in a breakout room. I think
Okay.
I might just have to kind of visually see
Okay,
how
okay.
your grade
Yeah.
book is set up, and maybe we can figure it out from there. But good questions. I know, I'm sorry. I'm still trying to like
No, it's
figure it
okay.
out a
Okay.
little bit too.
Sorry, I'll let everybody else continue with the more normal questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Does anyone have any other questions? Let me check the chat.
I think Brent said probably, but just wanted to double check. Um, it also has can exceed that question
Mm-hmm.
within the actual item itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, I give 5 points extra credit if they complete my course eval and post a screenshot. Um, it has can exceed in that item itself. So do we also click that as well as in the final calculated can exceed?
So final calculated, yes, check the can exceed. For the item itself, it is optional. The can exceed for the item is more so for the situation where you have an activity with additional points. So the easiest example of that is a quiz. There's a way to make a quiz, and then maybe you want to have some extra bonus questions worth 2 points. So in that situation, it's in the document, the bonus activity document. But in that situation, you would add the bonus points in the quiz itself, and then go to the grade book as well and select can exceed. I should just do it. So let's just show real quick. So
So I understand what you just said.
yes,
Yeah, the difference between the two.
yeah. So we say it's optional for the bonus, but the only time it really is, you really need to do it is just for the situation with quizzes with extra bonus points. Yeah.